And here we go. So yeah, first off, before we move into new stuff, we are talking about the slot effect today. So that's where the jib and the mainsail are kind of helping each other. So you have that uh, that phrase, "the whole is greater than the sum of its parts." We have that effect here as well. But for anybody who has uh, some knowledge of the slot effect, it may also not work the same way you had understood it before. I'm kind of honestly surprised we're not seeing Dan in here yet, because I would be expecting him to chime in right about now. But anyway, let's look at uh, like we did yesterday. We'll look into what we might know about it, and then we'll look at maybe why that might not be right. Um, so we'll give the popular form of the slot effect, and then we'll review real quick what we talked about yesterday and how it kind of plays into what we had to talk about today. So what you have probably or may have heard before, may or may not, the slot effect. So when we know we have air flowing over the jib, we have air flowing over the main. When they are together, then there's this kind of gap, right? If we think of the inside of our sail and the outside of our sail, right? We'll just use that term. So the outside would be like the back side, and then the inside would be the side that's facing us. If I'm the skipper on my boat, right, I'm looking at the inside of the sails. That's the term I'll use for now. So hopefully that doesn't confuse anyone. Anyway, so we have between the slot we have, right, is between the forestay right on front of the boat and the mast. This is where air is coming down to go over either the inside of the jib or the outside of the main, right? So air is kind of funneling in there. If we think of all the air that's coming in between that forestay and the mast is now coming through and has to go between the jib and the main as they come back to each other, right? So if we were able to kind of look at, am I in view? Yeah, there we go, board's in view. So if we were able to look at what we see from above again, here's our mast, and here's our forestay, here's our jib, here's our main, right? So all the air that comes in through this gap now has to fit through this gap. And if we have paid attention to anything in science classes, we know that if we have the same amount of air, right, all this air came in here and it hasn't magically vanished. It's got to come out the back. So it's come in through a gap this wide. Now it's got to leave through a gap this wide. It narrows down. The way that happens is it speeds up. So that's what we're told, and that's what we may have understood about this slot effect, is that the jib is actually speeding up the air over the back of the mainsail. Now we have more lift over the main, and it's a good deal. Turns out, as we talked about yesterday with the whole Bernoulli Principle thing about how the sails create lift, that's not exactly what's happening. So let's look at, or real quick review of what we talked about yesterday to help us make sense of what we have today. So yesterday we said the whole Bernoulli Principle idea, where we have, we've got the air is going faster over the top of the airplane wing, and it creates lift because of the Bernoulli Principle, and it pulls the wing up into the air. So we said that's not actually how it works. There's several simple questions you could ask yourself that make that not really make sense. The one particularly relevant to us is the sails aren't shaped like an airplane wing, right? They're basically, it's the same distance whether you go on the inside or the outside of the sail. So that can't be what's happening. It is probably worth pointing out that this is not to say that the Bernoulli idea of faster fluid moving faster creates less pressure. That absolutely still happens. It's just not. This is not causing that to happen, to occur, right? Because there is no there is no longer distance that the air is taking. So that's not actually happening right here. So what is happening? The air is going around the back of the sail. The air is going around the front of the sail, right? It's still splitting. It's just basically going the same distance. But the air going around the front of the sail is, draw it up again so that we can easily see, right? We've got our sail, got our wind coming down. Some air is going around the front. It's being deflected. This is kind of our quick and simple explanation we can give to people. The air going around the back has to flow around the back, right? It's got to get rid of the void that's happening right here, right? If this air just kept going straight, we're creating a vacuum. We can't create a vacuum. Nature can't do that. So this air is deflected around the back of the sail. It's kind of pulled into this, and that's part of where we're getting our lift from, right? The second part that, if we remember, is that when this air comes off the back of the sail, and this air comes off the back, as they meet together, they do have to come back together at the same speed, right? So one of our things that we talked about in the Bernoulli explanation is that we said it's got to come back. Each particle that's split right here has to come back and meet its other particle, and that's not really the case. That doesn't have to happen, but they do have to come back together at the same speed. It's like if I'm pulling all our sailboats in at the end of a day with no wind, we've got 5 or 6 sailboats in a line on a tow. If one of them falls off the tow line, we can pull them back, but we have to be going the same speed as them when we grab them, right? It doesn't matter whether we grab them at the second boat down the line or the fourth boat down the line. But if we're moving at 5 knots and they're moving at 0 knots, we're just going to yank somebody off the boat. So we got to be moving the same speed. So that's basically what the Cutta condition was saying that we talked about yesterday, right? So the air does come back to the same speed. We'll talk in a little bit more about what that means for us, but that's all we have to remember for now. But remember, anytime something changes, this Cutta condition has to be reestablished for a little bit of time before that the same speed flow is reestablished. We have that little starting vortex we said, right? The air kind of flows around the back, and it creates a little whirlpool of air. That will go away, but before it goes away, it starts up. It acts like a little starting motor. It's going this direction, and it starts to create this circulation around the entire sail, right? In a clockwise direction. So that is also giving us lift. As this air is coming around the back of the sail, it's speeding up. It's also helping to speed up this air that's going around the back of our sail. It's kind of slowing down up the front here. It's speeding up around the back. So again, that is creating lift for us. So those two things, this circulation and this deflection around the back, are what kind of combine to create lift for us. So remembering that, now we can move forward. So that's one sail, right? We had that picture of one sail. When we have our 2 sails together, now we've got our main sail and we've got our jib. That's not a great looking main. There we go. The same thing is happening for each of these sails. This sail has its deflection around the back. It's creating circulation. This sail has air flowing around the back, and it's also got circulation. So the first thing we got to look for, first thing we have to look at is what's going on. How do those different circulation fields interact with each other? So if I can find my image here, this guy, boom, coming up on your screen. This is what things are looking like, and he's got his wind drawn from a different direction. So wind is coming from the left in his image. But that means, remember, our circulation is going around. Our starting vortex would go from here, and it would turn this direction, which means that the circulation that it's starting up, think of 2 gears working together, is going to be going this direction around the jib. Same thing with the main. We're going to have circulation going this direction around the main. If we look at what's happening right here in the slot in between the main and the jib, they're actually opposing each other. So what's actually going to happen is the air in the slot is slowed down. And right there, that's like totally opposite of what we might have been told about how the slot works. So that seems to be kind of, it almost seems to be counterintuitive here, right? It seems like that would not help us. But if we keep going, we'll see how it is in fact very useful. So that's what's going on with those circulation fields in that slot. Next up, we have, if I can scroll down a little bit in my notes. Yeah, so that's kind of what things are looking like as these two sails are together. So if we pull up a couple more pictures, we're looking at something that might not make an extreme amount of sense. Oh, I pulled it up on my screen instead of yours. Here we go. Try this. We're looking at this guy. So what we're looking at here is these are called streamlines, right? This is how they look at information from the wind tunnels and stuff. But we've kind of got that same picture before, right? We've kind of got our mainsail here and our forestay, or headstay as the other term might be. But this is without a jib. We've got just the main again, and this is just giving us reference for where the jib will be when we add it in, right? So we can see we've got this air flown over, and when they make these graphs, these streamlines, the closer the lines are to each other, the faster the air is going. So we can see when we put this sail, this airfoil inside a wind tunnel, we can see this. We've got this air speeding up because these lines are closer together around the back of the sail. Now, if we were to add the jib in, let me get the next picture. Should be this guy. Boom. Now we add the jib in. Things are looking different. So again, we can see these lines are not as close together behind the main, right? We said that through this slot, the air gets slowed down. One other thing to look at is where we have this stagnation streamline. If we remember from yesterday, we said the stagnation streamline is kind of like the continental divide, right? Wherever that line is, that's marking on one side. This is all the air that's going around the back of the jib. On the other side, this is all the air that's going around the front of the jib, or the main, whichever sail you're looking at. So let's flip back real quick to the other picture, and we can see for the mainsail, this guy, S sub M, if we want to get all fancy scientifical, this guy is coming right up around, where's he going? It's this guy, right? So he's going around the top here, and then we've got some air going around the front. When we add in the jib, if I can bring back that next picture, boom, right here. Now we've got the streamline is like straight to the front of the mainsail, and the jib, this guy, this was the line that went to the forestay before, right? It's moving further up. This guy is moving up closer to the front of the jib. So this whole picture, if this is kind of confusing, we got a lot of lines. Don't worry, we'll kind of simplify it on we'll see what we need to see on the whiteboard. But this is kind of like the data that you get from when they do all these wind tunnel stuff. So if we go back to talking about what this actually looks like here, so we've got our jib, we've got our main. We'll put them back up, and I will stick to. Maybe that's hopefully doesn't get too confusing, switching back and forth between the wind direction in his picture and ours. But we're used to, wind coming down from the top. So that's kind of how we'll keep drawing things, right? So here's our jib, here's our main. So here's what's going on. We'll look at what the jib does to the mainsail, and then we'll look at what the mainsail does to the jib, right? So we said that the air in the slot, the air going through here is getting slowed down. So that kind of does two things for us, right? One is, if we remember what we just said about that cut-it condition, where the air coming off the back side of the sail, the air coming off the front of the sail, it's got to be at the same speed. That means that before the air on the back of the sail leaves the sail, it does actually have to slow down a little bit. It did speed up to give us some lift, but now right before it leaves the sail, it has to slow down so it can join back up. Remember, it doesn't have to be particle going back to the same particle it left, but the two lines do have to be the same speed. It's like merging on a highway. You're in the merge lane at 35, but you do have to get up to 55 before you can hop into the real highway lane. Or vice versa. If you're exiting the highway, you've got to slow down. But what that means is if we have air going through the slot more slowly, then in theory, we do have a little less lift over this mainsail than we could. But when we get to the end, this air is going slower than it would have otherwise. That means we're less likely to stall. If we remember talking about the boundary layer yesterday, the boundary layer being, right at the sail, the air touching the sail there's friction, it sticks, it doesn't move. You get further away, the air is able to go a little faster, a little faster, a little faster, a little faster until it gets to its full speed. We've got that boundary layer of not full speed. It doesn't like to slow down suddenly. So if we have air going over the sail too fast, it's more likely to stall by getting ripped off the sail when we're trying to slow it down, right? So by the jib slowing the air going around the back of the main, it's actually making the mainsail less likely to stall. So for anybody who has sailed lasers, I know I saw at least Lucy in here. We've figured out in our experimentations that the laser it's a lot easier to stall the sail, right? We have to be a lot more careful with how we're trimming it, because it's a lot easier for it to stall, and we realize we're not going as fast as everybody else, even though we're trimmed exactly the same.
Yipper doodles.
Yes, Lucy knows. But it's not something we typically are worried about in the FJ, right? So that's kind of why that's going on, is that when we have the jib, the mainsail is much less likely to stall, to have the flow get ripped off the back of it. The other thing that's going on is that we have something called downwash, which is, if you remember, we won't go back and point out the specific arrows, but we looked at those arrows in the wind tunnel, and we noticed that the stagnation streamline was moving for each sail, right? So when we have the main and the jib working together, the main experiences what we call downwash, and this is, we don't even remember that word, that's fine, but it just means that streamline, that continental divide, has shifted forward basically all the way to the front of the mainsail. And the practical effect of that is that the main feels like it's sailing in a header. So we can again compare to a laser, right? An FJ to a laser. If we have, here's our laser, and if we've looked at kind of how the boat is rigged up, we can't pull the mainsail in more than right to the corner of the boat, right? Because that's where the pulley ends up. So the sail looks like this. In the FJ, because the main sheet's in the middle of the boat, we can pull it almost right into the center. But the boats, that means the angles of these sails to the wind are a different angle depending on where the boat's pointed, right? But these two boats can basically sail the same angle upwind. They can point the same angle upwind. So they're both going the same direction, but the FJ mainsail ends up being trimmed in a lot more than the laser. So the reason that is the FJ, has got a jib. It's the effect of the jib is causing the main to feel like it's in a header. So it needs to be trimmed in more compared to the laser, which is only working on its own. And so it's just feeling the wind coming down from here, right? So the FJ feels like its wind, if the laser's wind is coming from here, FJ feels like its wind is coming from there. We got a little bit more of an angle, right? So that's kind of another thing that's happening with the main. So that one isn't necessarily an enhancement of performance. It's just something that we can understand. That's what's going on. So that's what the jib is doing to the main, right? We have lower speed over the back, so less likely to stall, and the main feels like it's sailing in a header. All right, so now what is the mainsail doing to the jib? So there's actually a lot more that's going on here, I think. and there's a lot more that's really beneficial to the jib. So if we look at this, what we have, scroll down a little bit in my notes. Cool. So we said the FJ, or sorry, the mainsail, it has downwash. So that continental divide, that stagnation streamline, it shifts toward the front of the sail. The jib, it sees upwash. So that stagnation streamline moves aft, moves toward the back of the sail, right? So what that means is we have more air going around the back of the jib, and more airflow around the back of the sail means more lift. So that's cool. And also, we said the downwash causes a header, the upwash causes a lift. So that kind of explains why your jib is never sheeted in, never pulled in as much as the main. If we think about where our angles are, we've got our boat here, right? Here's our mainsail, and then our jib, which is attached to the same point along the center line as the mainsail is, right? The mainsail is on the mast, which is on the center line of the boat. The jib is right on the tip of the bow, that's on the center line. But the back of the main comes pretty much just about to the center line. The jib really comes in, to the edge of the boat, a few inches in from the edge of the boat. So if we've really thought about that before, that means the jib is not pulled in anywhere close to as far as the main. But this is the reason, because not only is the main feeling a header, like we just explained, but the jib is feeling a lift. And if we remember talking about dealing with lifts and shifts in our apparent wind, right, we can either head up higher, or we can let our sails out a little bit and get more speed, right? So that's what's going on here. We're essentially pretending that the jib is, or we're not pretending, the jib is in a lift. So we're pretending that rather than head up, we just ease the sail a bit, right? So even though this is trimmed fully in on the jib, it just always feels like it's out a little bit in a lift. So that's why it's able to be at a different trimming angle than the mainsail. So I thought that was pretty cool when I learned that. But anyway, so that's one thing that happens, right? We have more airflow around the backside of the jib because we don't have as much air going through that slot. We also, because of that, we have a bit of a lift, right? The other thing is, I just said that, right? We not only is with the air is going through the slot more slowly, but it's actually just as well as being slower, there's just not as much air because it is getting deflected around the back of that main, or of that jib, sorry. So that gives us more lift. The last thing, another really interesting part, right on the back of the jib, if we remember, we said on the main, right, we've got for either sail, we've got that cutting condition, the air flowing off, it's got to be the same speed, right, as they join back together. So for the mainsail, we slow the air down, so going around the back, it doesn't have to slow down as much. For the jib, we're the same ideas happening, the air doesn't have to slow down as much, but why it happens is different. So we've got this air going through the slot, it is slowed down by the circulation field, just like we talked about, but it's not slower than the surrounding air, right? It's not as slow as it would be without the jib there, but it's not as fast as it would be without the jib there, but it is still faster than the rest of the air around it. So this air going through the slot is still a little faster than the air that's like right here compared to the boat, right? So it's not going as fast as it would be around the main on its own, but faster than anywhere else. So as this air comes around the back of the jib, we know that it's going to have to slow down a bit to meet up with the air going around the front of the jib. But the air going around the front of the jib is the air that's going through the slot. That's faster than the surrounding air. So that means the air going around the back of the jib doesn't have to slow down as much in order to meet that cutting condition and perfectly match up with the air from the front, right? So when these two arrows come back together, they're still going much faster than the surrounding air. So that means that's just one more factor that's letting the jib keep more lift, right? not only is it's the air is staying faster, so it has more lift, but it doesn't have to slow down as much, which means that, again, separation or stalling is not as much of a problem. We don't have to worry about that as much. So it's kind of neat to look at that and realize between the two sails, having the main and the jib working together is causing both sails to be less likely to stall, but for completely different reasons, right? So the mainsail is less likely to stall because the air around it is slower. The jib is less likely to stall because the air around it is faster, which is really crazy, really neat. Cool. So that's kind of how that's everything that happens there. That's what's going on. That's why we do have a benefit to these sails working together. So it's not what we might have been told before about how the slot works. It's probably actually more effective than if that original story were true, right? So it does rely on both our sails being trimmed the right way. So if we're sailing around with our jib flapping or without a jib on our boat, then we just have that mainsail. It's just like before. We've got to be careful to not let it stall. If we're sailing around with our jib pulled in, but our main luffing, then the jib is not going to have all those benefits, right? It's not going to be able to have more. It's not going to have more flow around the backside. It's still going to have to slow down to come off the back of the sail, which means that now we're worried about stalling again. But when both sails are trimmed properly, they're both in for the proper amount of whatever angle we're sailing upwind, then they work together like this. I totally forgot what I was next going to say as far as how those are working. So let me move on and I'll come back if I remember that. So one little extra bit that I thought was pretty neat is that we see this is our two sails working together on the boat. But we can kind of get the same effect sometimes between two different boats, right? So if you have heard the term safe leeward position, right? If we're in a safe leeward position, we're the yellow boat right here, right? We're making sure we've tacked into a space where we're not going to get bad air from this guy in any manner. We're below him, but we are ahead of him, right? We're ahead and to leeward. So we know that it's not possible for the red boat to pass us. That's why we call it safe leeward. What happens is that not only is it tactically impossible for him to pass us here, but we're also getting we're pretending we're the jib and he's the mainsail, right? So in this situation, remember all this stuff we just talked about. The jib is going to get more air flowing around it. The jib is going to be able to have more speed coming off the back of his sails without worrying about stalling. The jib is going to feel a lift, right? The mainsail is going to have the air over him slow down. The mainsail is going to feel a header. And so that's kind of the thing that's going on when we know that this guy in this position is gradually going to fall down like that because he's acting like the main. He's getting headed and having less wind than we do. So not only are we hurting him, like we have talked before about that idea of if we can get somebody here, we have we're hurting this guy. He is going to fall back. We've talked about that, but not only that, we're also getting benefited by him. And obviously, the closer we are, the more that'll happen. So this effect, our jib benefits from this are obviously going to be more than this. Maybe at a certain range, obviously you're not going to feel that. But I thought that was really cool because not only are we hurting him, but we're also helping ourselves by putting ourselves in that position. And I still don't remember what else I was going to say about proper, using those sails together. But that is what we had for today. Another one that's a little bit shorter because it is bringing in definitely some newer, interesting topics. But tomorrow we'll come back and we'll put what we talked about yesterday and what we talked about today all together with how we can practically affect that on our boat. what we can do to best make this all perform for us. Anybody have any questions? Cool. So let's see. As far as the week, workouts are sent out at the beginning. So if you're keeping up with those, cool stuff. Tomorrow, like I said, we'll talk about how to practically make our boat work for us. And other than that, I will see you tomorrow. Cool. Also, you should think about playing e-regatta. Who do we have anybody here who was on e-regatta on Monday night? I think we actually might not. Olivia's here, and Sterling. Olivia, how would you describe e-regatta? Should other people do it?
I don't think I'm the best person to ask about that. It's not like sailing.
It definitely isn't like sailing, but it's certainly.
E-regatta's pretty great.
There's somebody else weighing in.
It's pretty great. You get to practice sailing a bit. I'm on a bike ride right now, but you get to practice sailing a bit, and it's pretty fun. You get to spend time with your team. It's
sweet. Yeah, it's kind of like it's like Friday Night Bites, but you're also like playing with little electronic sailboats. It's almost more like like if you ever played with a radio control sailboat.
Oh, sorry, I cut out. Yeah, it's pretty great.
You don't have the immediate boat handling ability because you're playing with a little, you're directing your sailboat by little arrows on your keyboard. So you don't have the immediate feel of the tiller, but you get to, work with all the tactical things and figure out the wind shifts and that sort of thing. So I've definitely learned a lot by playing around with it. And certainly it is, when we started up, we turned on the Zoom meeting as well. So we're all kind of talking back and forth and figuring things out and stuff, giving each other hints. So it was pretty fun. So I would encourage, even if you don't know if you want to specifically like have a boat in e-regatta, still you can still hop in and just have a Monday night social hour. Anyway, so we will see you tomorrow at 3.